So my name is Vito Gagliardi, and my partner Kerry Wright and I are from the Porzio, Bromberg & Newman law firm, and we were fortunate enough to be invited to spearhead this feasibility study. Certainly want to thank the county commissioners for taking this project on, and in fact, in that regard, would say to the county commissioners and to the County of Salem, certainly we express our condolences on the loss of Tom Panko, longtime county official here in Salem County. Certainly appreciate the work with the college, particularly Mike. This was a challenging experience because we were given the opportunity to study something that in state history has never been done. But there have been other regional school districts formed in the state, and quite frankly, in terms of reconfiguring school districts, the work that we have done at Porzio means that no one has been involved with more of these projects in the history of the state. It's not even close. So there's so much challenging about this, but it's not necessarily a challenge because it's things that we haven't seen before. They're just similar issues on a larger scale. We recognize that what we're going to talk about tonight is of monumental significance to this county, to its students, to its taxpayers, and we took that into account every step of the way because what we're talking about is so fundamental in terms of how your tax dollars are spent and how your students are educated. And to that point, while we have a team of experts that we'll introduce to you in a moment, and by the way, they're the authors of the study, not attorneys. You wouldn't want attorneys to pretend to be demographers. We just made sure that the work was lawful and in conformance with the law. But we also, by the way, were not told how the study should come out. That is to say, this analysis was not driven by any agenda or any directive. We were simply asked to study whether we thought a countywide regional school district was feasible considering the demographics, the educational issues, and the finances. You'll also hear from the experts that along the way they thought it would be useful to analyze the county being split into two separate regional school districts, a north and a south, to take that as an additional comparator. So you were comparing not just the status quo, but two regional districts as opposed to one. The ultimate recommendation is that of the two alternatives, that is two regionals or one is better educationally and financially, but two regional options were studied because it seemed along the way that that would be a useful thing to do. But as I said, the fundamental structure of the study is to provide information to elected officials. And as I was talking about with regard to the important opportunities for taxpayers and students, this process that you'll hear about tonight, the analysis, is not the end of anything. The report is done. It's really the beginning of a dialogue for elected officials and for members of the community, since it is the citizens who get to vote on any proposed change. So our role is a simple one. Do we think that a change has benefits and is worthy of consideration? The answer to that is yes. But it's your elected officials who will decide whether or not to submit the question to you for a vote, and ultimately it's up to you to decide if you want to be part of a regional school district, be it the countywide district that you'll hear recommended tonight, or if there are some communities who are not interested and others who are, a smaller regional district with lesser benefits, but perhaps benefits to the status quo. So I think the most critical thing I have to say is that we appreciate and respect the opportunity we have to do this analysis, but we are not the decision makers in any respect. You are. And there'll be a point in time in the future where your elected officials will decide what is submitted to you for your consideration, and any change in structure will be determined by the citizens of an individual community. So if you are in a community interested in voting on this, you can elect to be a part of it or not, but you cannot and will not be dragged into a new structure unless it's something that the voters in your community decide that they want to do. And that's an important issue to remember when you hear this presentation. This is information for consideration of your elected representatives and for consideration by you. And we appreciate the opportunity to bring that information to you. So let me turn it over to my partner, Kerry Wright, who will start the presentation. You'll hear from each of the experts summarizing their work, and then, as I believe Mike mentioned, there's an opportunity for public comment, and we'll be happy to answer questions that come to you this evening, as well as to facilitate the answering of questions that come afterwards. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. This evening, you're going to hear from each of the 4 experts who authored the feasibility study. And we're going to start in a very specific order. The first expert that you're going to hear from is our school demographer, Dr. Richard Grip. Dr. Grip is the nation's foremost school demographer, and he'll tell you a little bit about what that means and what a very niche specialty it is. But Dr. Grip he does demographic analysis all over the state of New Jersey. He probably does more than 100 of them every year. Several of your districts probably have had him do their demographic analysis and enrollment projections. He's also the demographic expert for the New York public schools. So he's going to start us off. He's going to go over the demographics, which is your socioeconomics, the makeup of your different communities. He's also going to talk to you a little bit about your enrollment projections, because your enrollment projections really drive what we're going to talk about for the next 2 presentations. You need to know how many students you're going to have, and for a variety of reasons that are required by state law, you also need to know what the racial makeup of those students is going to be. So he's going to go over the enrollment projections because they drive the next 2 presentations, which is the education piece, right? Are we going to be able to fit the kids in specific buildings? How many children are we going to have to educate? And then that drives the financial piece. So after you hear from Dr. Grip, you're next going to hear from Henry Berman and from Dave Hespy. Henry Berman has spent his entire career, I think, in Salem County. So he's our homegrown expert. He has spent more than 50 years working for the Pittsgrove School District in a variety of capacities, starting with his first job as a custodian and ending at his retirement, which he still has not yet effectuated his final retirement, but ending with the superintendent in Pittsgrove. So he and Dave Hespy work together on the educational analysis. Dave Hespy is the former 2-time commissioner of education. Dave Hespy also has served as a community college president for Burlington County Community College. He has served as a superintendent, assistant superintendent. He has spent his career also in education. So the 2 of them collaborated together on the educational analysis, and you'll hear from them their opinions, both their analysis that they did and the recommendations for moving forward should you decide as a larger community to move forward with the recommendation from the study. And finally, last but definitely not least, you're going to hear from Steve Sia. Steve Sia is our finance expert. Steve has spent more than 25 years in education, specifically in finance as a school business administrator. So he's going to go over what some of you will no doubt believe is the most important aspect of that, and that is the savings, the cost, how does it all work together? What will the outcome, what will the tax levy look like if you ultimately move forward with the recommendation to create one large PK-12 school district? So he has done that analysis, and we'll have a lot of good information for you. I'm going to turn it over right now to Dr. Richard Grip, and then when we're all done, we will turn it over to the public, and you can ask all the questions you have. Or did you change the?
I just got to turn this on for him.
I was going to say, did you change the order? All right, Dr. Grip.
Thank you, Carrie, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. So let's start off what we studied. Tonight you're going to hear mostly about 2 different scenarios that we engaged in. One was, number 1, unifying all the districts under one county-wide regional school district. That's the first scenario that we looked at, would service all the students in the county. And the second one was creating 2 regional school districts in the county, one that would represent the northern section of Salem County, and the other regional would be the southern part of the county. So Carrie told you a little bit about myself. I actually grew up on the exact opposite end of the state in Secaucus in Hudson County, so it's about as far away as possible. I've been working in this it's really about 24 years now. I was a former school teacher. Before that, in Bridgewater, Raritan, Somerset County in physics and statistics. I actually now own a company called Statistical Forecasting, which I'm the executive director. We do only work in school demography, this type of work. And I still love it so much that I love to write journal articles about different things in school demography and present around the country if I can, after COVID, of course. And I have testified as an expert witness a number of times, actually, for districts that more or less want to get a divorce from each other in various hearings around the state. So, what do I look at? Well, what I look at first are all the communities that represent in Salem County. So the first thing I look at are population trends. We look at your historical population trends and your future population trends from a third-party agency that I don't do the projections for. It's called Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. So we do look at your census data as well. 2020 census data is very limited at this point. We do have the population counts. What else do we look at? We look at the demographic characteristics in each town, things such as race, education, people who have higher degrees of education, what's the income, median family income or household income of folks in the county by town, median housing prices, things like that. Now, why do we even bother, you might say, is that one part of the report, probably about 15, 20 pages, is just a summary on each particular town and all of its demographic characteristics. We're showing, really, all of you the similarities between the communities as well as the differences on a lot of these variables. Some communities are very high in the income level and some not quite so high. So we're showing that as part of this analysis. After we get through the macro, which is looking at the communities, then we drill down lower to the micro, which is the school districts. So for each of the school districts in the report, you're going to see a table for each school district that shows the historical enrollments from the 14-15 year to the 2019-20 school year, right before the pandemic. We did not include I've been working on this study probably, it was more than a year ago when I started. So the 21-22 school year we're currently in did not exist, and the 2020-21 school year had just begun. And we did not want to include the pandemic enrollments because, in my experience working with school districts around the country, it has really affected the enrollments mostly in a negative way, and we did not want to include a short-term event into this analysis, so we left out the 2021 year and ended on the 1920 school year. So we're still looking at a 6-year historical period for each district as well as each school within each district. Some districts only have one school, but for the other bigger ones, we looked at the enrollments of each individual school. Other things we looked at, we get birth counts for each one of the communities from the New Jersey Center for Health Statistics. Why do we bother to get birth counts? Well, what we want to try to do is determine how many kindergarten students come 5 years later, because births are the greatest predictor of kindergarten enrollment 5 years later. So by getting the birth counts, it helps us to project kindergarten students down the line. The next thing we did is we contacted the planning and zoning department of each community to find out if there's any new housing going on. Now, there's a lot of farmland preservation in Salem County, which has restricted new residential construction in most of the towns. Some of the towns, Oldmans and Woodstown, have residential developments, and for those particular communities, we tallied up the number of new housing units and figured out how many students would come from those particular units and added them into the baseline enrollment projections. So that's just a little devil in the details with housing and how we incorporated it. Next, we did the enrollment projections. Now, the enrollment projections are done for a couple reasons. We do them so we can see if there's going to be adequate capacity in all the school buildings going forward. That's one reason. But Steve Sia, who you're going to meet in a few moments, is going to use those projections to generate a lot of his financial numbers and the analysis in that particular section. So we projected enrollments for a 10-year period beginning with the 2020-21 school year through 2930. That was done for every school and every district, of course, as well. So as I mentioned before, the next thing we do is we looked at the capacities. Are the school buildings in each of the school districts adequate in being able to accommodate all the children currently, as well as in 10 years from now? And to summarize real quickly, I can tell you this, is that there is a surplus of seating in most buildings and the majority of the schools in Salem County currently because of some of the declining enrollment. And with the projections that I'm going to be talking about in a moment, we're expecting that the surplus of seating will continue, which is good news because in the sense that you don't have to worry about bond referendums for additions with new buildings and the cost that's associated with that. Next thing we looked at, and this is again to try to see how similar or different school districts are in terms of their student body, we looked at the economically disadvantaged student population. And how do we do that? We just look at the free and reduced lunch, number of students that receive free or reduced lunch in each one of the districts. I can tell you that countywide, Salem County has a fairly high percentage of students receiving free or reduced lunch. In the last 6 years, it's basically between 40 and 43% of the student body countywide. Now, some particular districts in the county go as high as about 75%. Racial impact. Carrie had talked about this very briefly at the outset, that we look at racial impact, and this is really a statute-driven thing where what we look at is if we were to move students around in a particular district, from one district to another, what would be the racial composition of the school district after we move students out, and what would be the racial composition of the district that they're moving to after those students are moved into? That's a consideration in some studies. It's really not really a big consideration in this one because one of the things we're going to talk about over and over tonight is that we're not moving any students around within the county for the next 5 years. We're going to keep them educated exactly in the schools that they're currently being educated. So racial impact really becomes an issue when you start moving students out of one district into another school district. But since everybody's staying exactly where they are, and we'll talk more about the governance later in the program tonight, there's not going to be a racial impact. So this takes a look at, if you got really good eagle eyes, which I do not, but this is the historical enrollments of Salem County for the past 6 years. And really there's a couple numbers you want to look at. On the far right, there is, let me go back to that. On the far right, you can see it has the enrollment over time for the last 6 years total, PK to 12. And the numbers have been north or south of 11,000 students in the whole county. Just to the left of that, there are the totals for the high school population. The high school population has been declining over time. And you might be saying, well, you know, why isn't the PK to 12 population declining? It seems to be fairly stable. Well, it's sort of misleading because a lot of the decline that would have happened in the county has been offset by two things. The numbers that you see up here include all the school districts in Salem County, including the new charter school, as well as Salem County VOTEC. It does not include Salem County Special Services, which is a district for special education students. So this does include the addition of the charter school, which I believe was in 2019-20, so you get some extra students from that, as well as the expansion of pre-kindergarten students in a lot of programs. There's been some initiatives in the state for some grants for pre-kindergarten students, which some of the districts in the county have taken advantage of. So if you pull out the pre-K population, which is just expanding those programs, you would have seen declining enrollment in the county over the past 6 years. On the projected side of things, what we're seeing is, if you go again to the far right, you're still seeing numbers just south of 11,000 students for about the next 6 years before they begin to decline. One thing I should tell you as a demographer, the years 6 to 10 in a projection period are least valid and reliable because we are then projecting students who have not been born to get the kindergarten students, so that's a pretty challenging piece of the puzzle. But you can see, at least from a ballpark vantage point in years 6 to 10, what is going to happen. We have a lot more confidence in the middle and high school populations in years 6 to 10 because those students have been born or they are currently in the system already as elementary students. So as I mentioned at the outset, we looked at two scenarios, one being a county-wide system and the other one being this regional two-system regional district set up by geography, north and south. Now, the map up there may be hard for you to read, so I just wanted to tell you the names of the towns that we consider to be the north and those in the south. So here we go. In the northern region, it would be Alloway, Penns Grove, Carneys Point, Elmer, Oldmans, Piles Grove, Pitts Grove, Upper Pitts Grove, and Woodstown. And in the southern regional, it would be Elsonboro, Lower Alloways Creek, Mannington, Pennsville, Quinton, and Salem. And we put them together in this fashion because many of the school districts that have only a K-8 district and they have to send their high school students somewhere else, for instance, some of the students go to Salem from the southern part of the town. We did not want to disturb a southern part of the county. We did not want to disturb those relationships. We wanted to keep the existing sending and receiving relationships to the high schools that are currently going intact. So we didn't want to break up those geographies, and that's what led to this north-south arrangement. The enrollments would be roughly 6,400 students in the north and about 3,600 students in the south. So the enrollment side of things would be a little skewed to the north. So this is telling us a little bit about the historical enrollments by race in the county. And what's been happening not only in the county itself, the entire population, but also at the school district level, is that the county students are becoming more racially diverse. The white population has been declining. In the 2019-20 school year, it was about 59% white, 19% black, and about 16% Hispanic, and a little bit for Asians and multi-race students. But what I should tell you is the white population is declining in the county, the Hispanic population is increasing, and the black population has been fairly stable. And the Hispanic population is pretty much driven from Penns Grove, and the black population is pretty much Salem. Those are the two areas where the towns have more diverse populations. So what's some of the key takeaways from my section? Number one, the countywide enrollments that we're projecting, they're projected to be fairly stable for the next 6 years before they begin to decline. Number two, the majority of schools in the county currently have a surplus of seating and are projected to continue having a surplus into the future because of the lack of enrollment increases. It's pretty much stable or declining. There is no negative racial impact because we're assuming that all the students are going to continue to be educated in their current schools at least for the next 5 years. We're going to hammer that over and over tonight. No one's moving anywhere. They're staying right where they are. Salem County students are becoming more racially diverse. As I mentioned before, the Hispanic population is increasing in number and percentage. And with that, we'll talk, if you have any questions for me later on, feel free. But I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues. We have Dave Hespy and Henry Berman. They'll talk about the educational analysis.
I'm not David Hespy. He'll be following me in regards to his portion, and he'll tell you a little bit about himself, as I will tell you a little bit about myself. Pittsgrove is my country in regards to the time I've spent. I moved into the township at the tender age of 7. I have spent nearly 70 years in and around Pittsgrove. Grew up in the town of Norma, attended Norma School in 1953 when it first opened. My first teaching job was in Norma School, and unfortunately, when it came to employment, I got stuck in Pittsgrove because I never left. After 51 years of spending my total educational career in Pittsgrove, I'm on very common ground. During my term here, I got to know all of the superintendents, the business administrators, a lot of teachers in regards to being here. Got to know board members, board presidents. Gave me an edge in regards to coming to this forum, because now I'm considered an expert on Pittsgrove Township and their schools. And also, part of that has rubbed off on the other schools that I work with. Pittsgrove did shared services for a while, so we worked with 6 school districts providing business services, and that gave me a clue into what will or won't work when it comes to providing a combined operation. We're noted in Salem County for doing some rather unique things. Eventually, the northern part of the state, we realized we've done some good things and sort of followed suit in terms of that. When I retired, I also have done some interim work in 2 of the school districts in this county, both Penns Grove and Pennsville. Having said that, it gave me an insight on what the facilities were like. I've been in every school in the county, one way or another, so I'm extremely familiar with the facilities. So I was the right person to talk about what this community educationally and in terms of facilities were like. Well, when we start the process, there's always a goal in terms of what we are going to be involved with. And that goal, first of all, was to consult with the stakeholders. As I said, I had an edge in terms of talking to the stakeholders. Some of them worked for me as assistant superintendents. Some of them worked for me as business administrators, financial people, and a variety of other roles. I got to know in my travels a good many of the board members and the presidents of those boards. Having that sort of in my back pocket, I could kind of tell where people were coming from in terms of their concerns. Having said that, that was the goal. We followed a particular process. I spent time interviewing by telephone, by personal visits, the administrators and the stakeholders that operate the schools here. And we talked about items that deal with the facilities. Were they comfortable with them? Do they think needed improvements? And we always wound up the conversation in one form or another of their views of consolidation. Having visited the schools in terms of the way I was involved with is a little different than making a call, can I come see your school, walk through it, and then leave. Now I spent some real quality time in the buildings in terms of that, so I could verify the fact that if someone said, yeah, we're in good shape, we've started leaking, the windows are there, we've invested in the school, I could say, yeah, that's the case because I saw that. I lived that in terms of my visits to schools. In terms of the topics we talked about, well, we talked about everything that makes up the school in terms of physical facilities. We talked about technology. We talked about roofing adequacy. Was building air conditioned? Wasn't it air conditioned? Are the windows operable? What were the issues that you had with people who needed appropriate access to the buildings, both physically and also when we talked about technology? Did your students have access to the internet? Was it reasonably fast enough so you can use it as a learning tool? Got some very straight answers to that, and I felt that there was a comfort level in terms of what was happening within the school districts. Having said that, we moved on to the topic of what do we see in the buildings, and how do you measure that? Well, I didn't have to develop a tool. Being around as long as I had, Trenton has a tool, and that tool is exercised every single year in regards to a facility. It's part of CUSAC. If you're a board member or administrator, you're very familiar with that particular term. There is a particular part of CUSAC that measures the quality of the building. For a building to, quote, pass muster in the state, it has to register at 80% of all the areas that they viewed. All of the schools, except one district, met the 80% in terms of the facility. The two schools that do not come out of the Salem School District, elementary school and a middle school. At this point in time, they're in line to have those buildings replaced at the state expense. But in essence, out of all of the school buildings that you have, only two were deficient. Speaks well in terms of what the communities have done in maintaining those facilities. When we talk about facilities, the key word today is technology. How did the staff feel about where they were? In this county, you have one-to-one. You have internet access. You can do distance learning. So there's a comfort level with the facilities here. You have smart boards. You've gotten away from the old chalkboard. I remember having to clean off the bottoms of my pant legs because of the dust that developed when you used a chalkboard. That's no longer there. But what is there is what I would say in some of the districts, if not the majority, the state of the art in terms of what they have going on in schools. The only problem is whatever you buy today is obsolete the following day. And there's always a race to maintain the best quality of what you have. Having said that, the district is changing. As you heard, the demographer, Dr. Grubb, say, the changes have implications in regards to what happens in Salem County in terms of as the need for increased investments to maintain the academic resources, to maintain where the students are, become more of a challenge. We have to understand that the population in Salem County is decreasing. That is related to the state funding. I have been fortunate enough over the past 50-some years to have gone through, I believe, all four major changes in the funding formula. Funding formula in all of those cases has one equal denominator, and that is the number of students that you are educating. The more students you have, the more money you get. The fewer the students you have, the less money you get. that becomes a problem with time. As the population shrinks after 5 or 6 years, there's going to be a need to reinvest some of the money that you are currently getting in what would be the next page of that funding. Having said that, we have basically two major items that came to mind in terms of talking to my colleagues. If you're going to save tax money, is that tax money worth the giving up of the local control? New Jersey is noted for its local control, the fact that the way the system works, it's governed locally, and is it in the best interest of your community, your students, to give that up? And second is the fact that if you're larger, does the school system provide a better education? And then everybody sitting here has a story about what happens if you get too large or if you're too small, and no one has gotten that answer to anyone's satisfaction. But that's something that, of course, will come to mind. Is bigger better? And at one point, are you either too big, or converse, are you too small? Those are kind of things that you're going to have to think about, and you may or may not take any action, because in essence, what you're getting tonight is basically what the future could be if you wanted that as a future or not. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Hespy.
Thanks. Controller. Thanks. Thank you, Henry. Let me just pursue the education chapter where Henry led off, and that's our intent when we do this work is to provide you with data and analysis that hopefully you'll then take back to your local communities in that stage one of, do we want to pursue this process any further or not? And it is a process. The feasibility study is the first step of a multi-step process, but every step builds on each other. And so hopefully this will inform those local conversations and provide at least the fuel for that to occur. Henry and I have done a lot of work together since I was, I guess we first met when I was chair of the Ed Leadership Department at Rowan University, 15, 20 years ago. And we've worked on many projects since, including a number of studies. The first thing we always look to what extent is the county already integrating educational programs. And here's some really good news for Salem County is that you do have a lot of already choice programs occurring within your county. Half the districts in the county participate in the New Jersey Inter-District School Choice Program, where students actually move across those district boundaries based upon thematic opportunities that may exist there. You have a new charter school serving middle grades up in northern Salem County with a STEAM program. Quite remarkably, you have 5 academy programs at your comprehensive high schools through the County Vocational Technical School. You also, and I'm going to keep going on this because I think it does tell a little tale about where we are right now in terms of educational integration. You have a dual enrollment program, which is by far and away one of the better dual enrollment programs in the state of New Jersey. And for the most part, that's students coming here to Salem Community College. And And the point that Henry and I like to make when we look at this degree of educational integration is if you're doing a lot of it, it means that you really have taken already those first steps, understanding that sharing programs does lead to better educational outcomes. We'd also like to point out that although our educational chapter is rich with data about programs and student performance and curriculum, there is a very direct connection between education and economic prosperity. And so, to a large extent, improving educational programs within a county will produce more workforce opportunities, more careers that are successful and meaningful for students. And also good news in Salem County is the way you go about that is using a career pipeline. You create a career pipeline, and that involves a whole bunch of different entities, from the VOTEC school to the county college, but also at the county level you have a workforce investment board, you have a chamber of commerce, all working together I think can create a much better career pipeline, and that could be one of the advantages of pursuing a greater countywide approach. Another advantage is in the area of equity. We heard Dr. Grip talk about demographics in the county, and that we have a few majority-minority schools. And so his job was to develop that demographic profile of the county. Henry and I, our job was to look at the educational impact of that. And we did find a correlation between student demographics and student performance. Larger at the K-8 level, a little less so at the high school level, just because of the academies and other opportunities that exist for choice at that level. This could be an area that a new countywide board could pursue through greater choice opportunities, for example. Now I'll go into a number of the advantages that we thought could develop with a countywide system. And don't forget, we're talking about opportunity, we're talking about potential. This is not a blueprint to an outcome. What we've done is studied the issue and say, yeah, the opportunity exists for these advantages to occur, but how that happens, how can it happen, are all conversations that have to happen at that local level, and we're hoping that this report just informs and fuels those local conversations about what could happen, what does happen, and how it happens is beyond what we can do. It's all going to be with you and your local leaders and your county leaders. But things that we believe the potential is there to do. Well, first thing is we think a unified countywide district would have this operational capacity to develop a shared curriculum office that could do a number of things to support not only the development and alignment of the curriculum, but also the implementation of the curriculum in the various schools of the county, and also to ensure that there's challenging coursework available to students in each one of those schools, and students should have that coursework available to them based on their own interests, of course. That's what we know will create that educational opportunity we're working on. A shared performance office. This office will use data to inform those decision-makings throughout the county districts. A professional development office to support teacher training and development in teaching and learning throughout the schools. Student and staff safety expertise can be greater brought to bear. Again, these are just examples of what we found in the report. A focus on talent. Talent is, of course, what brings the experts, the professionals, those teachers we want in the classroom, and then allows them to grow within our schools to the point that they're getting that job done at the level we want. And we believe that perhaps a talent office at the county level could support that at a higher level in a consistent way. more extracurricular activities, clubs and athletics, and we know these are things that interest students, they bring them to school, they keep them motivated, and so are a very important part of the educational program. I'll just mention two more. The first is programs for special populations of students. For example, a countywide office could bring a office of a director of special services, for example, in an office below that person. Challenges that might be faced by the schools of the county. For example, one of the more important ones is chronic absenteeism. Often is better dealt with at a county level where resources can be brought to bear that you might not have in any local community. Transportation, social workers, food programs, employment, medical and dental care, before and after school care, all sometimes are easier to put together in an effective way at the county or regional level. Now the next slide, and Henry spoke about it and Dr. Grip spoke about it, and I want to just speak about it just a little bit as well. It's going to take time for any regional board of education and regional leadership to understand the needs of the various communities, understand your expectations, understand your goals, and to give the new board time to grow into that challenge and develop that capacity. We believe it would be best to have at least a 5-year transitional period where all students and staff remain in their current assignments, and during that time the administration can come together, the board can come together, develop communication, develop expertise, develop capacity before being asked to make critical decisions throughout the county district. Governance, this of course is one of the most important issues in these studies. Local, as Henry alluded to, local control is one of the most important concepts in the state of New Jersey, that decisions occur locally. And we tried to come up with a system that is different than the one you'd provide in statutes. The law currently allows a new regional being formed to develop a different governance structure than what the statutes would normally dictate. For example, if you have a regional this size with this many members, the statutes would normally call for at-large voting so that some of your communities might share just one member, and we didn't think that was the right way to go. Instead, we're recommending that you look at a 15-member board so that every community has one member with weighted voting by population. So we kind of get at both of those issues simultaneously through this structure. Again, the governance structure is up to you. We're just making a recommendation that this bears looking at. We also think that you have a very valuable resource in the county, and that's you have sitting boards of education that do understand the communities, do understand the schools, and we don't think abolishing those boards right off the bat is the right approach. Instead, perhaps asking them to remain on as a bridge between the new Board of Education and the communities in advisory capacity, at least during those first years. And we also believe that formalizing a countywide curriculum council through the new Board of Education would be another way to make certain communication is clean and robust between the county board and the local communities. Almost every county in the state has a shared curriculum consortium of some nature, mostly informal, but we believe that formalizing that makes sense. So we're going to move on to the financial analysis, but let me just spend just 30 seconds on when you read through the education report. It's 110 pages. What you'll see in there, the first thing you'll see is a general description of all the schools in the county, all the districts. It's all pulled from public databases. The reason it's there is that there's probably going to be readers of this report who are not familiar with Salem County and deserve to know what you believe is important, what you are proud of. And then we go into reviews of curriculum, the extent to which students are achieving the curriculum. We look at professional development among the schools. We'll look at academic data, achievement gap data, student growth data. We'll look at special populations data. We'll look at transitions, how many transitions students make. We'll look at school safety issues. So you'll see around a dozen other issues thereafter that we look at and provide data on and analysis, again, to guide your conversations at the local level. Now, Steve, it's all yours. I got this.
Wear your mask. Is that yours? Okay. My name's Steve Saya. I completed the financial analysis. This slide provides some of my background. I have 25 years as a school business administrator from a K-8 district with 500 students to a pre-K through 12 with 4,500 students. So I have a range of experience with various school districts. And it just so happens that the educational advantages are certainly compelling, as was just reviewed, and we need to consider the financial impact of a regional. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. But first, I wanted to give you an idea of the types of districts and put that into some context. And this slide provides you with some of the varied structures that we were dealing with in the study. So 15 municipalities, 14 educational entities. Those entities included 7 PK through 8 sending receiving districts with agreements with area high schools, 2 PK through 12 regional school districts, 2 standalone PK through 12 districts, 1 PK-12 consolidated district serving 2 communities, the county vocational school and the charter school. So certainly a complex variety of organizational structures were considered as part of the study. So let's take a look at the framework. The model that we used and developed included some documents such as the audited financials, both revenues and expenses as a baseline. We use the user-friendly budgets. We use the demographic projections and those enrollment projections from the demographics section. So we got all that data together and we use it to project the revenues and expenses over the 10-year period. We also, as part of the model, included some key assumptions. So the study has quite a number of assumptions in it. I wanted to highlight a few at the beginning of the presentation. So the first is that we're taking the tax levies from each community and we're making estimates for the purposes of comparing the different alternatives. And it's not meant to approximate some future tax levy. So it's a projection for comparative purposes, not intended to be a prediction. So state aid for each of the districts, we also assume before and after are the same as the 2018-19 school year. We do make a consideration for aides that change by virtue of the change in structure. So as we change to a regional, what's that going to impact? And there are two aides that does impact. The first is intra-district choice aid, and the second, which is you'll likely lose a little because there are students that from within the county go to some of the choice districts, but there are also students from outside the county that come into the county for those choice. And if the new regional becomes a choice district, then the students from outside the county coming in, aid will be maintained for those. But students from within, there may be a loss of aid. On the plus side, the federal funding for Special Education Medicare initiative, Medicaid initiative, that funding is likely to go up under a regional as the expertise for that gets spread across districts that don't participate in the program now because they're too small. In terms of another assumption, we assume that the educational programs in the future are equivalent to those in place in the 18-19 school year, that the tuition costs are based on the actual state certified rates. The present organizational structure and the alternative configurations were calculated as though fully implemented in year one. As was indicated earlier, there's usually a phase-in, but for financial purposes, we like to look at an implementation from phase one because it better reflects the full financial impact over the 5 and the 10-year period. We also assume that current collective bargaining agreements remain in force until unified all-purpose regional agreement can be negotiated. So we're going to get into the savings for the countywide regional, but I want to take this opportunity and just clarify, because I think at our presentation last night, some people, I think, came away with a misconception that this would be a county-run school system. So the law really doesn't provide for that. What this would be is a regional school system with all the districts that are in the county participating in that regional. So the regional would run and operate the school, not the county government. So I just wanted to clarify that, based on some comments that we got after last night's presentation, we wanted to clarify that specific component. So with that said, as you would expect, unifying into some regional where we're bringing districts together are going to generate some savings. So what does that look like? So on the full countywide regional, we calculated savings of $6.8 million. And to put that into some context, as you can see, it represents about 3% of expenditures and about 8% of tax levy. There are also two major categories of savings. There's economy of scale and efficiencies. So when many people think about bringing small districts together and creating a bigger district, their mind goes to economies of scale. It's a larger organization to bring more purchasing power to bear, get deeper discounts, and because they have larger buying power. And that's certainly the case. In some areas, you will see economies, particularly in the area of food services, where everyone kind of does their own thing. But the major component of the savings is going to be in efficiencies. So efficiencies are broken down into two pieces. The first is direct cost savings. So those direct efficiencies actually bring down the costs and reduce tax levy. The second are indirect savings, indirect efficiencies. So they're still economic savings, but they don't lead to tax reductions. So what does that look like? So generally, when you have a function, and that function is now put into a central location, the individual who's doing that function will continue to be in the district, but not have that specific piece, that task to do. So they could spend their time doing more efficient things to bring the organization forward. And we see that with New Jersey Smart, for example. The student data gets transmitted to the State Department of Education. Every school district's responsible for doing it. There's someone in every district, maybe two, that has that function. But if that function is centralized, one or two people will do that. The other people in the other communities that have that task will be tasked with other more productive responsibilities, in essence, improving their efficiency. I'll give one other example in the area of technology. The study does not call for the elimination of any computer technicians. But grouping all that technology staff together allows the larger organization to be able to assign a person to handle cybersecurity, for example. And with the increased reliance on software and data, that couldn't be more important in this day and age when you see the number of ransomware and virus hits within various public entities. So there it's, again, you're not losing a position, you're gaining some efficiencies to make the operation work better and stronger. So what kind of methodologies did we use in order to determine what these savings would be? Well, as you can see, we used three different methodologies. The first is comparable districts. So we looked at other districts, the size of the regional, and how do they spend some of their money, and are there some lessons that we could learn from a larger organization? And there are, and I'll give you one good example in the area of audits. So school districts that are about the size of the regional that the county would be spend about $73,000 on their audit fees. Collectively, all the districts within Salem County spend $253,000. So that's a savings of $180,000 in audit fees alone. And there are other areas that I think are applicable for the comparative district methodology. We also built out cost centers and modeled them to determine what the central office staffing would look like. Superintendent's office, assistant superintendent, business offices, what do those look like? What kind of staffing would be needed, and what kind of redundancies would exist there? So as you can imagine, there are a lot of savings from that component. The third methodology involves looking at the research and academic literature as a cross-check to see whether those savings make sense based on what you would expect to see from the academic literature. And indeed they do. There's a wide variety of ranges for different savings. One study showed a range between $2 million and $6 million for every school district that combines into a larger district. So the $6.8 million in that context are the direct efficiencies, as I said before, the amounts that hit the bottom line. But part of the academic savings, those economic savings, also include those indirect efficiencies that we spoke about earlier. So it is going to be up to the new board to determine what savings are taken and how much is redeployed into new programs and services. This isn't not necessarily just an exercise in saving money, but making the school district better, as was indicated in the education section. We did have two scenarios. So I reviewed the first scenario, $6.8 million savings for the county regional. The split between north and south generated lower savings. So in the north, we saw savings of about $3.8 million, and the south about $1 million. So collectively, about $4.8 million So there is significant amount of additional savings when we group things for all the districts within the county in one regional. Let's go through some of the financial results. So as was indicated earlier, you will be making the decision. So any community that's interested in joining the regional will have to put the question to the community through a referendum. And having the community see a reduction in tax levy really increases the odds of passage. So we want to try and find an allocation mechanism where we can allocate the tax levy for the new regional in such a way that each community sees some savings. And that's the main goal. And the traditional way of doing that is using two variables, equalized valuation and enrollment. And through those variables, or a combination of the two, we need to try to find an allocation that works for everyone. So we tried 100% equalized valuation, 100% enrollment, and every combination in between. And frankly, using that traditional methodology, there were no viable combination of the two variables that provided savings for every community over the 10-year period studied. But the law provides, a new law that was recently passed provides for an alternative allocation mechanism, a transitional allocation mechanism, and we're going to review that, because that did provide an opportunity for us to see cost reductions or tax levy reductions for each of the communities in the study. So the idea here is we take the $6.8 million, it's an 8% or 7.95% savings for each community over the 10-year period studied. So that's an annual savings, I want to be clear. That was another question that came up at the last presentation. So when we're looking at the study, these numbers are averaged over the period, but they're annualized savings. So every year we're saving these, because these savings that we identified are recurring costs, so this is a recurring savings on an annual basis. So this is what the transitional allocation that we've developed looks like. So it essentially takes the first three columns, or the three components of tax levy that communities pay for the general fund, the debt service fund, and then the respective communities component of the vocational school taxes. You get a total tax number here. So if we add up all the taxes paid for education identified in the county regional, we see a total of $86 million. So a way that we can ensure that everyone sees some savings is to use the proportional amount of this tax levy and set that as the ongoing rate for future allocations for the new regional. So let's do a little example. So Alloway, as an example, you add up all their tax levies, total $4.3 million. That represents 5% of this total $86 million. So that 5% would both be their new allocation for whatever the regional school district determines as their tax obligation to run the district. It also would mean their share of whatever savings was generated off of the $86 million. So in this case, it's 6.8. So if the new board took 6.8 of savings, Alloway's share would be $342,000. So that's how it would work. And one of the advantages to this allocation mechanism is that the new board could see more savings, because certainly what we went through was not an exhaustive identification of all the savings available. When the new district is developed, there's going to be a true zero-based budget, developing the budget from the ground up. And I am certain that they will find additional savings. The question is whether you take some of those savings and you enhance the educational system by investing in additional programs and services. So, but whatever the net result is, whether it's 6.8, 10, or $5 million, each community would see the same proportional reduction as they would in this example. So that's, I think, the real advantage of this mechanism, and the new state law provides that as an opportunity. And this slide simply summarizes what we've talked about, that this mechanism provides a proportional for future allocations. So whenever the group of districts decide to participate, you take a snapshot of the tax levy at that point, and that'll be the proportional share for 10 years. And then you phase in over the next 10 years 100% equalized valuation. And you could see that in the report in a little bit more detail, but as this slide indicates, the benefit is that the same percentage of savings are provided to each community, whether the actual savings are higher or lower. Let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges, facing a regional district of this size. So the first is, as an opportunity, it's creating something new. It provides a real chance that you could take research and academic literature and the best practices and formulate it into a new entity. And those opportunities are real and could be promising. Larger organization also provides some resilience. Any small district knows that a new special education placement could be a challenge finding the funding for that placement. Also, building repairs and things along those lines. A larger organization has resilience built in. And also capacity. And as was discussed earlier in the education section, it does provide an opportunity for more courses, more programs, different athletic opportunities. Expertise, and we touched upon that a little bit when I discussed the cybersecurity expert, but that could happen also in the area of maintenance or instruction, where you'll have subject area supervisors, specialists in that area that bring their expertise to bear. Anything from that to a maintenance worker now, instead of being a jack of all trades or a general maintenance person, you could hire tradespeople, licensed electricians, plumbers, HVAC. That could generate some savings, but also provide some immediate repairs, doing things in-house rather than contracting them out. Diversifying risk. So across a larger organization, risk is inherently diversified through insurances, health insurance, things along those lines. It also helps with internal controls. Smaller districts have difficulty having enough people working so that they have tasks that are subdivided such that it provides financial integrity. When I was working in a small K-8, it was me and a secretary, and it was hard to balance the internal controls necessary to make sure that the district's finances are segregated in such a way to ensure their integrity. And also cross-training. So getting multiple people within a department to learn other people's jobs to be able to cover during absences. Those are some of the opportunities, but there are certainly challenges. Something that was discussed earlier, came up a couple of times, is local control. So there is a relinquishing to the regional board, although some of that is mitigated by the governance, the way some of the recommendations made in the governance section. Accessibility. Right now, each community has access to their boards. They may have closer proximity. By necessity, there would be one Board of Education, and by the virtue of the size of the county, it will be less proximate than the current boards are. And organizational culture, and I think this is probably one of the is a significant challenge for any organization to try and develop an organizational culture. Now, blending the various districts' cultures together will be something that will need a lot of direction and attention in order to bring the various communities together under one umbrella. Let's take a look at some of the financial takeaways. Some of these things that we've mentioned already with regard to the savings, the choice aid. Something that we didn't touch on was the borrowing margin. So by group, the way the state calculates what a district can borrow, it's based on a percentage depending on their structure. So by grouping all the districts into a pre-K through 12 regional, it increases the borrowing margin by almost $18 million, which would help for any future expansions. And we did see that this transitional allocation provides all districts with to experience some of the savings and share in those tax reductions. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Gagliardi to review the final slide.
Thank you, Steve. So as I mentioned at the outset, while we looked at the status quo and compared it to the all-county regional, there was an intermediate analysis as far as the two regions is concerned. As you can see, there are virtues to both regionalization scenarios, but the unanimous consensus of the experts was that the county-wide regional was more advantageous. There are advantages to both, as I said, but the conclusion was, and the report makes clear, the benefits across the board of a county-wide region, particularly with regard to the educational opportunities and the financial benefits.